January 3, 1943. 20-year-old gunner Alan Magee smashed through the glass roof of the St. Nazaire train station. He fell from 20,000 feet. This was the routine arithmetic of bomber crew losses. The deafening crunch of shattering glass echoed across the stone platform. How does a man survive a 4-mile fall? The answer lies in the angle of the train station's glass panels. Minutes earlier, flak shredded his bomber over the target. An explosion ripped off the right wing. The aircraft snapped into a violent spin. Magee was trapped. The ball turret was a 4-foot steel bubble, too tight for a parachute. He had to climb out. He cranked the manual gears. The 4-foot turret rotated. He kicked open the internal hatch. He pulled himself up into the disintegrating fuselage. He found his parachute pack. Shrapnel had already torn the silk to useless rags. A second blast shattered the bomber. The shockwave ejected Magee into the freezing void. Minus 40 degrees. The lack of oxygen suffocated him. He blacked out immediately. Gravity took over. The free fall speed of a human body reaches approximately 193 kilometers per hour. He fell 4 miles. 28 shrapnel wounds bled out before he even hit the ground. He struck the skylight. The angled panels absorbed his lethal momentum. He slammed onto the floor below. Right arm snapped. Leg crushed. He would spend the next 18 months as a prisoner of war. But first, he had to survive the concrete floor. German patrols found him breathing among the shards. Soldiers lifted the mutilated gunner from the debris and transferred him directly to their medics. Magee did not fall alone. In November 1943, Sergeant Eugene Moran repeated the plunge over Bremen. The mission started as a routine heavy raid. Hundreds of bombers pushed through the flak to drop their payload. Then the Luftwaffe swarmed the formation. Bullets tore through Moran's arms. An explosion shattered his ribs. He reached for his parachute. Just shredded silk. Useless. Seconds later, a direct hit severed the entire tail section. The roaring fortress vanished. The cramped gunner station instantly transformed into an isolated falling metal coffin. 20,000 feet of empty sky. The severed tail tumbled toward the earth. Disorienting rotation slammed Moran against the aluminum walls. Brutal G-forces pinned his bleeding body to the floor. The horizon became a violent blur of ground and clouds. No exit. No hope. Moran stopped fighting. He went limp inside the spinning trap, surrendering to the void and passively waiting for the final, crushing impact. The wreckage smashed into a tall pine tree. Thick branches absorbed the terminal velocity. Moran survived the crash with a caved-in skull. German soldiers pulled him from the debris. He spent the next 18 months as a prisoner of war. The surgeon who treated his shattered head was a captive Serbian doctor. Moran instantly knew his tail section was severed. James Ley had a different experience. In January 1944, the skies over Athens were thick with clouds. Ley plummeted toward the earth inside his broken tail gunner compartment. He believed the entire bomber was falling with him. The torn aluminum plunged through the overcast. It smashed into a dense tree canopy. The branches absorbed the fatal impact energy. Ley crawled out of the mangled debris. He looked around for the main fuselage. Nothing. Total isolation. Why did a working parachute fail to guarantee survival? The bomber's own design provided the answer. Narrow hatches and the centrifugal force of a death spiral locked the crew inside. The standard escape hatch measured exactly 73 by 66 centimeters. A tight squeeze for a man in a simple uniform. But bomber crews wore bulky sheepskin flight suits, heavy heated boots, thick chest parachutes. That small metal frame turned into a deadly physical trap. When a crippled aircraft lost a wing, gravity became the enemy. A flaming spin generated massive centrifugal forces. The pressure pinned crewmen against the vibrating bulkheads. They could not stand up. They could not crawl to the exits. A parachute pack offered a false promise of salvation. The reality of a doomed flight was a mechanical slaughter. Out of all the crews shot out of the sky, the final survival rate for an emergency evacuation was exactly 25%. While trapped gunners fought to escape plummeting wreckage, pilots faced a different burden. Men like Lawrence Delancey had to keep half-destroyed machines in the sky. On October 15, 1944, an 88mm anti-aircraft shell found its mark over Cologne. The blast wiped out the flight mechanics instantly. The instrument panel shattered into twisted metal. No altimeter, no airspeed indicator. The main oxygen lines severed completely. Staff Sergeant George Abbott took the direct hit. His body absorbed the jagged steel shrapnel, shielding the men behind him. The entire plexiglass nose simply ceased to exist. First Lieutenant Delancey stared forward. There was no cockpit glass, just an empty hole. A deafening roar swallowed the bomber. Ice-cold winds slammed into the flight deck at 200 miles per hour. At -40 degrees Celsius, hurricane-force winds freeze exposed human skin in under 60 seconds. The crew was suffocating without oxygen. They were freezing in the relentless slipstream. Delancey shoved the yoke forward. He forced the mutilated bomber into a steep dive, trading safe altitude for breathable air. That meant dropping straight into the kill zone of German flak batteries. The men braced for a crash. The navigator flew blind, relying entirely on ground landmarks and sheer instinct. Delancey fought the chaotic drag of the missing nose. The burden of their survival rested solely on his freezing hands. The United States Army would later award Delancey a Silver Star for what happened next. The crippled bomber crawled across the English Channel. It finally reached the Nut Hampstead base. The machine had no brakes, it had no working flaps, it had no front end. Nobody knows how he landed. Delancey flew a Fortress with no face, but on February 1, 1943, the crew of the All-American dragged home a bomber literally sliced in half. The bombardier dropped the payload over the target. The formation banked west for the long 300-mile drag back to base. Then the Messerschmitts struck. Two fighters hit them head-on. The gunners tracked the first, shredding its engine. The fighter burned. The second peeled off, spiraling out of control. A dead pilot held the stick. The German fighter hurled past the defensive guns. Its wing slammed into the rear of the All-American. Steel sheared through aluminum. The fuselage tore open. The tail gunner suddenly found himself suspended in a separate severed cabin, staring down into 20,000 feet of empty air. The entire rear of the plane rested on a prayer. It hung securely by nothing more than narrow strips of mangled metal and a few shredded floorboards on the right side. The severed tail swayed violently in the slipstream. A deafening metallic screech echoed through the open fuselage with every gust of wind. How did a machine with severed control cables keep flying? The impact coincided with the exact moment the pilot engaged the autopilot. The wing slice cut the mechanical flight cables clean through. But the heavy bomber system used advanced gyroscopes and electrical servo motors to maintain level flight. Copper wiring bypassed the destroyed physical links. The crew flew a broken ship, trusting their lives to a handful of surviving electrical cords bridging the gap. From a neighboring aircraft, Lieutenant Charles Cutforth raised his camera. He snapped the shutter. The photograph captured pure surrealism, showing a crippled heavy bomber cruising steadily toward the horizon, while its detached tail swung wildly in the draft. Two engines were dead. The left stabilizer was gone. Yet the machine refused to fall. The crew held the altitude. They crossed the Mediterranean and touched down on the dirt runway without a single casualty. Mechanics towed the severed wreck into the hangar, welded a new tail onto the airframe, and sent the All-American straight back into combat. 50%. Half of all airmen flying over Europe ended up dead, wounded, or captured. Crews returning on the torn All-American or falling without a parachute were merely expendable material. They fueled a massive joint strategy directed by the United States and Britain. The objective was absolute ruin. Planners aimed to obliterate the factories of Nazi Germany from above, crush the infrastructure, stop military production at the source. It was a cold calculation. Generals treated human lives as a replaceable resource to burn enemy industry. The attrition defied logic. The Army Air Forces lost more men over Europe than the entire Marine Corps lost fighting in the Pacific. Flesh paid for shattered concrete. To sustain this aerial siege, planners needed a heavy workhorse. The military staked everything on the Boeing B-17 flying fortress. To crush German infrastructure, command demanded the impossible. Crews had to fly straight into a solid wall of anti-aircraft fire without altering course. Why fly voluntarily into shrapnel? The precision of the bomb site demanded an absolutely level path. Down below, German operators spun Würzburg radar dishes. They tracked the incoming altitude. They calculated the bomber speed. The data fed into massive defensive batteries guarding industrial hubs like Schweinfurt. 88 and 105 mm guns swiveled upward. Hundreds of barrels fired in unison. A coordinated strike. Seconds later, the sky ahead of the formation ripped open. Black smoke blossomed exactly on their flight path. An 88 mm shell did not need a direct hit. It detonated in the cold air. The blast created a lethal cloud of jagged steel with a 30-foot radius. Shockwaves violently rocked the heavy bombers. The acrid stench of cordite and black powder bled through the thin aluminum fuselage. It filled the freezing cabin. Human instincts screamed to drop the nose, to bank away, to survive. But strict military protocol forbade evasion. The pilot had to hold the yoke perfectly still. The Norden device required at least 30 seconds of a dead-steady platform to calculate the drop. So they flew straight into the black clouds. Shrapnel slashed through the metal skin like wet paper. It severed steel control cables. It ruptured high-octane fuel lines. It tore right through crew stations. You could see it happen through the cockpit glass. A bomber would take a heavy hit. A wing would violently dip. Thick smoke poured from the shattered engines. The crippled machine slipped out of the tight defensive box. It entered a slow, fatal spiral toward the earth. The remaining crews watched through the plexiglass. They waited for white silk. Parachutes never appeared, but 13 heavy machine guns offered no salvation to men forbidden to dodge. The aircraft bristled with 50 caliber barrels, turning the fuselage into a fortress of lead. Waist gunners froze. The ball turret operator hung suspended beneath the belly. Top and tail shooters scanned the cold horizon. Boeing built the massive machine to fight its way through enemy airspace at 30,000 feet. American generals demanded daylight precision raids. Survival relied entirely on the combat box formation. Intersecting fields of fire from dozens of overlapping bombers created an impenetrable wall of tracer rounds. But holding that rigid grid demanded filigree precision from exhausted pilots who fought the heavy controls through explosive shockwaves. They could never break formation. The illusion of safety shattered. German interceptors tore the squadrons apart. The cold statistics condemned the crews. Every fourth bomber fell. Half the young airmen never came home. The rigid system simply broke human beings. Blood froze on the aluminum floors until the P-51 Mustang finally arrived. These long-range escorts pushed the Luftwaffe back, providing a vital shield for the bleeding bomber fleets. The daily losses plummeted. But the core justification for this massive sacrifice collapsed upon review. Commanders promised pinpoint accuracy. Yet through the freezing terror and thick smoke, most payloads missed the factories completely. Only a tiny fraction actually hit their intended targets. Exactly 20%.